The officer stepped into the cabin the moment we landed, and every passenger froze because everyone already knew exactly who he was here for. Susan. Row 18, the woman who'd spent the last 2 hours screaming, filming us, and swearing my wife had stolen her seat. Dahlia's fingers tightened around mine as the purser pointed directly at our row. The officer's voice cut clean through the stale air. "Ma'am, gather your belongings. You're coming with us." Susan shot to her feet, wild-eyed. "Me, I'm the victim. They targeted me." The officer didn't flinch. "We've seen the video." My heart dropped. Because he wasn't talking about her video, I noticed Susan long before she ever spoke to us. She was the kind of passenger who treated boarding like a territorial battle, shoving her tote into the overhead bin, snapping at a man for touching her bag, and lecturing a flight attendant about upgrades she clearly didn't have. Every move she made radiated the same message: the world bends for me. I've dealt with people like her before. Loud confidence, zero self-awareness, a voice that slices through any room and immediately demands submission. The defining moment came when she spotted Dahlia's white gown, a soft shimmer against the dim cabin lighting, and her expression tightened. Not curiosity, not admiration, something closer to resentment. That was the first time she really looked at us, and I swear I felt her decide something in that instant. She wanted control, and she had already chosen who she planned to take it from. The first tension came fast. She tried to wedge her oversized purse into the overhead bin above us, nearly hitting Dahlia in the face. When I steadied the bag to keep it from falling, she snapped, "Don't touch my things," as if I'd attempted a robbery mid-flight. That was when it clicked. Susan didn't target us because of a seat. She targeted us because we were an easy challenge, and she was desperate for a win. Dahlia and I had been living in a state of stress for weeks. Between work deadlines, wedding plans, and a constant cycle of just one more thing, requests the honeymoon had become less a luxury and more a survival experience. When we finally arrived at the airport 2 hours early, bags checked, boarding passes in hand, we breathed a sigh of relief for the first time in months. The flight was supposed to be the reset button. 5 quiet hours. A window seat for her, an aisle seat for me, and the middle seat empty, something we'd paid extra for just to guarantee we'd sit together without hassle. That's all we wanted: no chaos, no drama, no more problem solving, just peace. As the plane filled, everything looked promising. The cabin buzzed with the gentle sounds of settling passengers, seatbelts clicking overhead, bins closing, soft greetings exchanged among strangers. Dahlia pressed her forehead to the window, smiling at the reflection of her gown catching the morning light. "This feels real now," she whispered. I squeezed her hand, letting myself believe her. Then the first subtle warning arrived. A bag thudded overhead so hard the bin rattled. A voice followed, sharp, impatient, laced with entitlement. Something about incompetent boarding and people who don't respect priority passengers. I didn't pay much attention at first. Airports attract all kinds of personalities. But the tone stuck with me, scraping lightly at the back of my mind. Seconds later came a louder complaint, this time directed at no one and everyone at once. Of course, these seats. Why do I always get stuck with people who don't know how to travel? Dahlia's posture tightened. She didn't look back, but fear edged her breath. I wrapped an arm around her shoulder, hoping to shield her from whatever was forming behind us. We both heard the footsteps, aggressive, purposeful, before we saw her. A woman pushing down the aisle as if each row existed solely to inconvenience her. Her blouse swayed sharply, her sunglasses perched like a badge of superiority. And when she stopped at our row, she didn't speak right away. She just stared. At Dahlia, at the dress, at our joined hands. And in that silent second, I realized something chilling. She hadn't come looking for a seat. She'd come looking for control. The harassment started small enough that anyone could ignore it, but not us, especially after the way she approached our seats. From the back row, Susan began narrating the flight as if she were hosting a podcast no one subscribed to. "These days, passengers just sit wherever they want," she said, loudly flipping through the safety card as if too disgusted to read. A moment later, I guess manners are dead in this generation. Every line of people was moving straight toward us, without her even mentioning our names. A few passengers shifted uncomfortably, glancing at her and us as if they were waiting for a sign of guilt. Dahlia pulled her scarf closer, her shoulders hunching as they always did when she felt threatened. I squeezed her hand, but my stomach tightened with each new thrust. Then a small change, subtle but unmistakable. Susan leaned into the aisle, craning her neck as if to stretch, but her eyes were fixed on our boarding passes on the tray table. She was trying to memorize them. It was then that I realized she wasn't angry. She was preparing something. Susan didn't stop at passive-aggressive comments. By now, she was crossing lines, personal, spatial, and legal if it came to it. She leaned over Dahlia's seat, shadowing her in the aisle, pointing at the boarding pass as if she could rewrite it with sheer force. "You have to switch," she said, her voice sharp, hovering over Dahlia's shoulder. "Do you understand?" Passengers shifted uneasily as she pressed her case, inching closer, invading the tiny bubble around us. Every step she took into our space felt deliberate, as if claiming territory. Then she whipped out her phone, snapping photos of our boarding passes and our faces. She wasn't asking, they were being documented, cataloged, weaponized for the next scene in her performance. I spoke quietly, steady, "Step back. My wife isn't going anywhere." Her eyes narrowed. "You'll regret this. Everyone will see how selfish you are." The mini-twist, the man she claimed was her husband, sat frozen a few rows back, staring at the floor, clearly unwilling to intervene. Susan's fury was entirely self-generated. No ally existed to buffer her. Dahlia's breath hitched, but I could see the spark ignite. She knew this was bigger than a seat. Susan's aggression escalated from words to tangible chaos. First, she yanked open the overhead bin above our row, slamming my bag onto the floor. It wasn't heavy, but the jolt knocked Dahlia's shawl to the aisle, nearly brushing the feet of a passenger. Then, she jabbed at my seatback screen, while claiming she was adjusting it, and I caught a flicker of the tray table shaking. Every small action sent microwaves of fear through the cabin. A woman across the aisle whispered, "She's going to break something." And she almost did. The real twist came when she raised her phone again, this time filming aggressively, pointing at Dahlia as if to capture damage in progress. But in the chaos, she didn't notice her own reflection in the screen, her husband watching, slack-jawed, clearly uncomfortable with the destruction she'd caused. I realized then that she wasn't just escalating the fight, she was creating evidence of her own behavior, even as she tried to manufacture a story painting us as the villains. Dahlia's hands trembled as she clutched mine. "It's more than just a seat," she whispered. And she was right. Each deliberate movement, pushed bin, wobbling tray, aggressive filming, was designed to destabilize us, humiliate us, and rewrite reality in her favor. I glanced at the teen across the aisle, hoodie dangling, phone in hand. He'd been watching all this. And I suddenly knew we had a lifeline. Someone was recording everything. By now, the flight attendants had clearly realized this wasn't just a loud passenger, it was a full-blown disruption. Susan's volume had escalated beyond complaints into accusations and threats, and the crew had to step in. "Ma'am," the lead attendant said, kneeling slightly to meet her eye level, "you need to stop filming and lower your voice. Other passengers are being disturbed." Susan's response was immediate and theatrical. "You're taking their side," they mocked me. "They're hiding from a camera because they're guilty." Every word made the cabin tighter, heavier. Dahlia's hands were white-knuckled on mine. Then the mini-twist, the teenager across the aisle, leaned forward quietly, mouthing, "I recorded everything." Relief surged through me. Not just relief, but clarity. We finally had proof evidence that could show exactly who was escalating this conflict and how. The crew's tone shifted immediately when they saw the phone. Neutrality cracked. Decisiveness filled the space. The balance of power was about to change. And I knew it once the video was shown, Susan would no longer control the narrative. Susan didn't know the teen had been recording. The phone hummed quietly across the aisle, its screen small but crystal clear, every shout, every shove, every false accusation caught on tape. I took a deep breath, stood slowly, and walked toward the attendant at the front. "This is what actually happened," I said, handing over the video. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but anticipation. The cabin shifted. The crew leaned in, eyes sharp, now faces no longer tentative. The purser's jaw tightened as she watched Susan's true behavior unfold. Susan, meanwhile, continued ranting from 3 rows back, oblivious. They laughed at me. They humiliated me. Her husband slouched further into his seat, embarrassed, trapped by her chaos. The mini-twist, as the purser glanced at me, then at the screen, I realized the tide had fully turned. This wasn't about seats anymore. This was about accountability. A PA announcement cut through the tension. "Ladies and gentlemen, we request full cooperation from all passengers." Susan froze, scanning the cabin, finally sensing the shift. She didn't yet understand that the rules of this flight had changed, and that her narrative had begun to collapse. And as I returned to Dahlia's side, gripping her hand, I knew one thing. The real confrontation was about to begin. The purser stepped into the aisle like a judge entering a courtroom, and for the first time, the cabin felt truly still. Passengers froze mid-breath, every eye on Susan, whose theatrics had dominated the flight until now. Her sunglasses caught the overhead lights, reflecting a fury that seemed too large for the narrow aisle. "Ma'am," the purser began, her tone crisp but unwavering, "we have received multiple reports of disruptive and unsafe behavior on this flight. This includes yelling at other passengers, refusing to comply with crew instructions, and creating a hostile environment. Susan's jaw dropped, her voice rising in disbelief. Disruptive, I am the times, victim times, they mocked me, they humiliated me, you're taking their side. The purser didn't flinch. Your behavior has endangered the comfort and safety of others. This is about your actions, not the couple's. Her husband slumped further into his seat, eyes averted, silent and defeated. The tension in the cabin tightened like a spring. Dahlia gripped my hand, trembling, and I could feel her pulse racing against mine. I realized the truth had shifted the power mid-air. Susan's stage was collapsing, and the audience, every passenger, was watching the unraveling with quiet judgment. The air was thick with anticipation, and I knew this confrontation would not end quietly. I handed the purser the teen's phone. The video played on the small screen, but every detail was clear. Susan's outbursts, her false claims, her pointed finger, the way she leaned into Dahlia's space, her shrieks about mockery and cruel newlyweds. The purser's eyes shifted from the screen to Susan, narrowing slightly as the realization hit. She tapped play again, letting the entire cabin witness the unedited truth. Each passenger leaned forward, tension twisting in their chests as Susan's performance crumbled before their eyes. This footage confirms the complaints, the purser said, voice sharp. You initiated contact, refused to follow instructions, and continued escalating after repeated requests. Your claims about being mocked are unfounded. Susan's face, twisted lips, trembling hands gripping her seat. Edited. Misunderstood. You're lying. I have a medical condition. Your behavior is documented and verifiable, the purser cut in. The narrative you've tried to spin no longer holds. Your actions have consequences. The cabin shifted. Passengers exchanged relieved glances. Some murmured quietly, a few nodded toward us with gratitude. Susan's husband finally looked at her, shame washing over his face. She opened her mouth to argue again, but stopped. The room had turned. The tide wasn't just against her, it was final. The mini-twist landed like a punch for the first time. Susan realized that the very evidence she had tried to control the video had sealed her downfall. The purser's voice cut through the cabin, firm and unyielding. Ma'am, you are required to remain seated and silent for the remainder of this flight. Any further disruption will result in additional safety protocols and intervention from airport security upon landing. Susan's lips quivered, her face, a storm of disbelief and fury. This is absurd. They manipulated you. I've been wronged. Her husband spoke, voice low, exhausted. Please, just stop. She spun toward him, outrage carved into every line. You're supposed to support me. He didn't respond. His gaze stayed fixed on the floor, resignation etched into every movement. The cabin was silent, but relief hummed beneath it. Passengers exhaled slowly, some shaking their heads, some smiling quietly. I could feel Dahlia's fingers tighten around mine, her tension slowly melting into a shaky, cautious relief. Susan slumped back, arms crossed tightly, glaring at nothing. Her bravado and entitlement, so dominant before, had vanished. Every step she had taken to control the cabin, to rewrite reality in her favor, had collapsed. I leaned toward Dahlia, whispering, "It's over, for now." But even in her silence, Susan radiated fury, a storm spent, but not yet dissipated. And I knew the flight wasn't over, the lessons weren't complete, and the fallout had only just begun. The house finally felt like ours again. After weeks of constant tension, passive-aggressive notes, and late-night phone calls that never stopped ringing, I sank into the couch, exhaling like the weight of 1,000 small injustices had just been lifted. Dahlia leaned against my shoulder, eyes closed, and I could feel the same relief pulsing through her. For the first time in ages, the air inside felt calm instead of sharp, with expectation. Across the street, neighbors peeked cautiously from windows and porches, unsure at first, then slowly nodding, murmuring to each other. One waved, another smiled. Even the usually indifferent lawn care crew slowed their pace to glance at us. Word had traveled fast. The HOA Karen, who had terrorized the neighborhood, was finally being held accountable. We stepped outside, breathing in the crisp evening air. Children played in the cul-de-sac without interruption. A sense of community began to thread itself back into the neighborhood, a quiet celebration of regained freedom. Conversations carried over fences, laughter returned to front porches, and somewhere in that warm twilight, I realized how much we had all been holding our breath for her downfall. The emotional payoff was tangible. Relief, yes, but also justice shared and witnessed. The next morning, the HOA board meeting was like stepping into a courtroom. Documentation, emails, photographs, and my own records of every encounter were laid bare. The board, once timid and unwilling to intervene, had no choice. Formal complaints were filed, fines levied, and the HOA member in question, our neighborhood Karen, was suspended indefinitely. The judge reviewing her repeated harassment and violations of both HOA rules and local ordinances imposed financial restitution. She would cover the legal fees we incurred documenting her behavior, along with significant penalties for property harassment and trespass. The HOA underwent immediate restructuring. New leadership was voted in, stricter enforcement policies were enacted, and the community finally had the tools to prevent this type of chaos from recurring. Every piece of evidence mattered: the notes she left, the video recordings, the testimonies from neighbors, and each contributed to an airtight case. Standing there, hearing the final ruling, I felt an incredible sense of satisfaction. It wasn't just about money or fines, it was about accountability, about seeing someone who had exploited power finally meet the consequences of their actions. Weeks later, the poetic justice became even sweeter. The same HOA Karen, stripped of authority, was now living under stricter rules, monitored closely by the very neighbors she had tried to dominate. Meanwhile, the community that had cowered under her intimidation began to flourish. New gardens appeared, garage sales returned, and social barbecues brought neighbors together in a way we hadn't seen in years. Dahlia and I hosted the first block gathering after her suspension. We laughed over shared stories of her antics, the tension dissolving into camaraderie. The kids ran between sprinklers, and the adults shared knowing glances, silently acknowledging the storm we'd survived. It wasn't vengeance, it was life itself correcting imbalance, and it felt natural, satisfying. I stood in my front yard that evening, watching the sunset reflect off clean windows and newly painted shutters, and realized the house, the street, and even our lives had shifted. Peace wasn't just restored, it had grown stronger, and I knew deep down that we had emerged not only unbroken, but victorious. I wrapped an arm around Dahlia, smiling at the soft glow in her eyes. "We survived her," I whispered. She laughed, leaning her head against my shoulder. "And now we finally get to live here, free." And for the first time in months, the world felt exactly as it should: calm, fair, and ours.